Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this show is recorded live on June 19th, 2009. For more information on the Biota podcasts, check out biota.org/podcast. As folks will remember, we're now doing the show live on TalkShoe Friday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific, every other Friday. And the easiest way to get the call-in information is to go to biota.org/podcast, and that'll give you the information with regards to calling in the show. It'll give you the information with regards to the live chat. The previous Biota Lives, the chat has just been on fire through TalkShoe. I think we've made the right decision moving over to TalkShoe because we get a number of chat participants through, and we have one in the chat already. I'm hoping this evening to have Gerald de Jong and William R. Buckley on, but there may be others that call in as well. The next episode on July 3rd, Artificial Life and Nationalism. This in part is inspired by the book Wired for War, which contains an interesting discussion associated with Rodney Brooks' iRobot company and the assistance of the military and these kind of things. And it also gives me the wonderful opportunity to play the 4th of July version of the Biota Live theme. So next episode, July 3rd, Friday, 8 p.m. Pacific, Wired for War. So I'd like to give a shout-out to Brian Pelton, a late shout-out with regards to the birth of his daughter, Fiona. I heard from Brian this week as I'm attempting to record the visions of the Evo Grid, and I'd like to get Brian's feedback, obviously, that he and his wife had a daughter, Fiona, in January of this year. So congratulations out to Brian. News associated with Biota 5. Well, I think Dick Gordon Swamp currently probably working on a new book. He seems to have a book out every other month. But the news with regards to Biota 5 is 2011 at the University of Manitoba, where Dick Gordon is based. 3 tracks, as described previously: Origins of Artificial Life, which carries on with Bruce Damer's Evo Grid-related discussion, and probably A-Life 12, as it's going to occur. Artificial Life Perspective in the dialogue between science, philosophy, and religion, which obviously carries on from Dick Gordon's book, and Bridging the Gap between Artificial Life in Industry, Academia, and as a Hobby, with a game subtrack. I've announced this in the previous Biota Lives, and I think as the time gets closer, Dick will be no doubt contacting the community and soliciting assistance with regards to that. But I want to put the announcement out there that we are actually planning a Biota conference. On a personal note, in the middle of September, I'm going to be attending Graytham, Silicon Valley. This is going to be the first trip that I've had with the new job, so it'll be wonderful to get out and meet a wide variety of folks who I've only ever communicated with through this very podcast. I hope to meet people such as Jeffrey Ventrella, Zan Gill, Bruce Damer's videographer, Al Lundell, a wide variety of folk who have participated, obviously Scott Davis and Scott Schaefer. I mean, the folks who attend the Graytham Silicon Valley, these are people that I've been in some form of communication with for a number of years now, and I think on a personal note, it may actually be quite a moving experience to finally put faces to names and names to faces, and particularly voices. I'm interested in some feedback, actually, from the community about what they'd like to see me speak on. One I thought was originally was to do 3 20-minute talks on aspects of the Biota community in Noble Ape. I'm getting very heavily back into ApeScript, which is the scripting language associated with Noble Ape. And, it'd be wonderful to be able to do a demonstration for that at SRI. Potentially the Noble Ape cognitive simulation. I think we have Gerald de Jong in the chat. Gerald, are you able to call in, or are you having problems calling in? I had some problems calling in, so I'm not sure if Gerald's having problems or whether he'll come on the chat shortly. Anyway, I'll move back to my time in the Bay Area in a minute when Gerald's on the call. But I'm asking for feedback with regards to the visions of the Evo Grid series. We had Natasha Vita-Moore on last week. There were a number of folk in the chat room. Unfortunately, I don't follow the chat through the visions part of the recording. I do via Biota Live, but not through the visions because I like to concentrate on the guests. Now, an important part with regards to the Natasha Vita-Moore conversation, there was probably 20 minutes in the center of the conversation that I actually cut from the recording, primarily because she was really interviewing me more than I was talking to her. It was quite curious. My wife came home halfway through and thought that I was actually being interviewed rather than me talking to Natasha Vita Moore. So what I've done is invited Natasha back onto a Biota Live so other folks in the community can answer some of her questions and also ask her some questions. I think the general feedback that I got from that particular Visions of the Evo Grid was that there were a number of additional questions that people had, and I hope to have Natasha on a Biota Live in the near future in order to jam with her more and certainly have folks in the community call in and participate as well. I looked at the podcast numbers recently. These are actually the download numbers associated with the podcast, both via the site and from iTunes and from a wide variety of sources. And the numbers seem to have decreased quite dramatically. I'm not really sure what that is related to. There had been some problem with regards to downloads from Chinese audio search sites, which I think has hit all podcasters, and now they've dropped off. I think I've heard reports from a number of podcasters that their numbers have decreased. But I'm wondering, and this is feedback that I really need from the community, I'm wondering if people have just reached a degree of saturation with regards to the Evo Grid-related discussion. I kind of have some concern that people may be either just, less interested in talking about it or would much rather hear from folks such as Gerald and myself and others in the community with regards to our own specific projects. And certainly I'm relatively receptive to that. So if people are actually interested in hearing more from us, so to speak, and less on the Evo Grid, please do give feedback. I think what will probably happen is the Visions of the Evo Grid series will slow down a little and we'll probably have more traditional biota-related discussion coming through the podcast and also new discussion. I mean, if you have topics or directions or areas that you'd like to see the podcast go in, please feel free to, submit questions or topics or actively participate, more importantly. So Biota Eve, this project was started off in some regard as a spin-off of the Evo Group, but I like to say historically it's actually been discussed in the biota community since the late 90s. So far we've had contributors from Gerald de Jong with his Darwin at Home XML phenotypes, my own Noble 8 XML phenotypes, and Scott Schaefer's MicroPond XML phenotypes. Well, this week we had some correspondence with Dave Kerr. Now, Dave Kerr is a name in the community. If folks who've listened to the podcast series prior to Biota Live will remember Dave Kerr's Nature, Naiture, or AI Planets. I mean, Dave Kerr has been developing artificial life for well more than a decade now, and it would be wonderful to have him back on a Biota Live. However, he's considering submitting an XML phenotype, and I think when Dave starts getting involved in particular, it will no doubt be something the community can benefit from, particularly with regards to just having an additional simulator. If you are an artificial life simulator, I really would encourage you to actively participate in the Biota project. It's kind of on a slow simmer currently. I think that's the nature of these things, that they just go through various fluxes. But I mean, Biota in particular is something that the community has been talking about for well more than a decade now. So, it's something that I think, the more the merrier, although I'm sure with the 3 existing, possibly 4 or 5 future contributors, we'll be able to generate something. And that's, half the real issue with regards to actually getting these simulations communicating. Hello?
Hello there, Tom.
Good to speak to you, Gerald. How are you this morning?
Very good, although it is a little early.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking that we should try recording at other times as well. However, this Friday night seems to fit in, relatively easily with my schedule. And also, Peter Newman in Australia has been saying that he'll call in at one time. So I think we may have to split it up just to make it a little easier for you folk. Oh, we've got Peter Newman on the chat. Speak and he appears. So, hello, Peter. Please consider calling in if you're interested. The contact details should be in the chat-related stuff too, Peter. It would be wonderful to have you on the discussion, particularly to talk about your current developments with the Evo Grid. So, Gerald, have you had a chance to listen to the Natasha Vita Moore Visions of the Evo Grid yet?
Oh, yeah, I listened to that. That was a good show. Very good.
Thank you. So, in terms of Evo Grid saturation, you've been an Evo Grid naysayer, but you've also been quite interested in the kind of continued discussion. Do you think we're currently oversaturating the audience with EvoGrid-related stuff, or would you like to see more?
Well, it depends on what. Like I said last time, I'd like to see eventually something realized in some form or other. So I want to get into the engineering of it. So is there any, if there's any opportunity to discuss that, then I'm into it.
Well, that's really Peter's forte. So, well, Peter's asking, he doesn't even know what we're talking about this evening. Peter, if you call in, we will talk about whatever you want to talk about. How does that sound? Well, Peter is the primary engineer of the EvoGrid currently. I mean, he's the one who's running the chemical simulations and giving direct feedback to Bruce. So, I mean, really, it'd be wonderful having Peter on the call this evening just to have a chance to chat specifically about what he's doing and how this fits into the kind of broader EvoGrid-related discussion. So, Peter, if you want to call in, we'll certainly take your call. But, I mean, as you were listening in, Gerald, I'm going to be flying to the Bay Area in mid-September to do one of these Graytham presentations. It seems quite ironic because I was promoting Graytham prior to even, Graytham, Bay Area, these kind of things. If you were to see me give a talk, what would you like to see me give a talk on?
You mean related to the EvoGrid or just anything Tom Barbalet?
Anything Tom Barbalet.
Okay. Let me see. I think I'd want to see I'd like to, oh yeah, I know what I'd like to do. I'd like you to give a code-based tour of Noble Ape.
Oh yeah.
So we just point out particular sections and describe how they actually function and stuff like that.
So I was thinking of doing that as a video podcast anyway.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I was also looking to eventually I would like to do some sort of online publication that is in a very friendly form. And on the one hand, and I've done stuff with video before, but actually what I'd like to do, I think preferred medium would be something like I've seen these things where you've got a sort of audio and a slideshow. And if you can put that online, I think it costs money though, so I haven't really looked into it in depth. But that would be the kind of thing to have, where you could, show certain images and then even jump into sections of the code while you're listening to audio. I don't think it necessarily requires you and me to get into the views, to be filmed directly.
Certainly, I'm not sure if you saw on the Noble Ape site, but a couple of computers ago, I did attempt to do that with a kind of tight zoom on Ape script code and me doing very patchy voiceover.
Yeah, this sort of thing is ideal. I mean, we've got to make more media like this because it turns out to be so much more accessible for new people. If you can just stumble across a video, then suddenly it all comes to life really quickly.
I was thinking, I'm exploring wikis currently, and one of the features I like is embedded audio in wikis. Do you think it could almost be like a kind of tour guide of the source code where you clicked on audio links and then you got, an explanation associated with the various bits of source code? Do you think that would work?
That sounds pretty good, actually. Never thought of that, embedded chunks of audio, but that makes some sense.
Okay. You've got me thinking.
It sounds easy to do as well. That's one of the advantages.
Yeah, my wife's going to Southern California for Father's Day, so I've got the house to myself for a couple of days. So I'll certainly think about that, Gerald. I think that's a good idea. So,
hey, Tom, did you hear that, or did you see on Twitter that I've called another Graytham meeting in Holland?
Oh no, I didn't see that. Please announce it.
Yeah, well, I just sent an email to the mailing list of the Graytham Netherlands, and just out of the blue because I wanted to. I've been wanting for quite a while now to set up another meeting, but I really didn't have a good enough theme for it because I'm tired of being the preacher of Darwin at home as sort of the main attraction. We did that once and then actually again, sort of, but there were other people, of course.
Certainly.
But I always tend to give my story again, and it's not actually it's not a bad idea. It's just that it's not progressing terribly quickly at this very moment because I'm doing too much work. But soon it'll start picking up, and then it'll be worthwhile because then I'll have more new things to show. But actually, from attending Dick Gordon's course last week, where William Buckley, or it wasn't last week, it was a couple of weeks ago, where William Buckley presented us his program called Golly. Have you ever heard of that?
Certainly, yes.
And he was showing us some really interesting things and talking about them in the context of the embryo physics course. And suddenly it occurred to me that this Golly program was really cool, and it'd be really good to have a Great Thumb meeting to sort of focus on that program. And I haven't actually filled in the details yet, but I'd like to even do a sort of a workshop where where everybody brings their laptop and we just we play around with things and people show stuff. And as a result, because I proposed immediately a date, which was the 3rd of July on a Friday, and a location, which is my office overlooking Rotterdam.
Wonderful.
And so, and also the program that we're going to take a look at it, and finally it wasn't me again. So, it all just came together, and everybody's replying back with, sure, that'd be great, I'll be there. And right now there's already 9 attendees, and there's probably going to be a few more.
Very good. And I think this is the true origins of Great Thumb. I mean, certainly if you talk to, Adam Eremenko and Brian and, these kind of folk, John Klein, I mean, the origins of Great Thumb Boston prior to the formalized meetings in some regard was, as you say, these kind of coding afternoons and evenings where they'd get together. And I think that's the origin of Nanopond or Micropond from there.
And here in the Netherlands, we haven't done that yet, really. We've had 2 Great Thumb meetings, but they were both in the form of sort of a presentation or several presentations. And this is going to be different because we can all sort of sit around the same nice long table, and we can share a video screen in the form of a television that you can hook up to your laptop. It's a table where we can all sit around. So I'm looking forward to having some really interesting discussions and exploring that Golly program a bit more. By the way, Golly was really, it looks like it's been really carefully written to be efficient at doing sort of game of life things. And it seems to be able to do quite impressive models.
So, as tends to be the case, we're being asked from the chat room to give an introduction of ourselves. Gerald, do you want to introduce who you are?
Sure. My name is Gerald de Jong, and I'm living in the Netherlands, although I'm originally Canadian. My claim to fame in this context is my project called Darwin at Home, which is something that's been going on for a good number of years, more than 10. And at the moment, it's evolving towards, if I can overuse the word evolve, it's evolving towards becoming an evolution game. And I haven't been able to spend too much time on it recently, but I expect I'm going to force myself at least to make some sort of a release of a first version at the very least sometime this year. Of course, this is a part-time activity. And the idea is to sort of build a community of people who like to play around with evolution and see if I can expand it and get people understanding evolution as a result of playing a game.
And in terms of the context of Biota, who are you?
Yeah, well, I've known Bruce Damer for quite some time, for ages actually, and we meet every few years when we're in a similar geographic location. I just happened to have encountered him recently in London when he was there, and I happened to be there as well on a vacation. So that was wonderful. It doesn't happen frequently, but when we meet, it's always good. And I attended the second and the third Biota conferences in Cambridge and then in San Jose, and participated in both of them. And this was a really exciting period. and I've been on the Biota Live podcast a number of times, and I have my own podcast at darwinatHome.org.
And my name is Tom Barbalet. I'm currently speaking to you from Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been developing a project called Noble Ape since 1996, although a number of the ideas predate it. I'm the current editor of the Biota website, and Bruce used the term director to describe me recently with regards to this whole Biota thing, and I thought it was a bit overdone, but that's the short answer of who I am. Similarly, I have a website, nobleape.com, and biota.org will get you information on Gerald and my work and related, web links and other stuff, so that's the place to go. So the topic this evening, Gerald, came to me in correspondence with Mark Badeau, and following Mark's appearance on Biota Live, he contacted me and asked me to kind of summarize my thoughts with regards to the problems in contemporary artificial life and what we as artificial life developers could do in terms of planning and strategizing a way forward. And this was a relatively interesting question, and my thinking associated with it came back to this idea of what is the value in artificial life. I mean, we talk every other week about artificial life through the Biota podcasts. There are obviously a number of researchers, the world over, academics who are doing things that either explicitly are artificial life or then into artificial life. We've had folks on like Ed Salford, who works at Eli Lilly. I have another friend, Duncan McRae, who I believe he works for another pharmaceutical company, but basically mirroring what Ed Salford does. They use artificial life primarily as search algorithms to troll through papers and, work out how researchers can spend their time more efficiently looking at chemical compounds. So there are all these kinds of uses of artificial life in industry in particular which aren't being actively tracked. And, there's almost kind of value slipping through the fingers of the academics and folks who could be tailoring their artificial life or at least creating an artificial life community that was more inclusive. So I framed this discussion with Mark with the idea of, well, what is the value of artificial life and how can we start tracking the value of artificial life and then giving feedback to, for example, the academics who are all independently currently taking and giving artificial life courses with their favourite, a few papers involved, but nothing that's relatively unified. And similarly, folks such as Ed Salford, who, again, are grazing artificial life papers, but don't have any kind of unified artificial life in industry, magazine or component of the artificial life journal. And I put this back to Mark that really, if I had some instigation with regards to the International Society of Artificial Life, I would move them into that kind of mindset where they were actually, gathering information and building the artificial life community on this to, and I use Java as a good example, and I mean, this is a familiar example to you as well, Gerald. I mean, Java wasn't just created and put out there for, the benefit of, developers that wanted to pick it up. It was actually actively evangelized and actively nurtured and supported, and, there was a community that was built and nurtured around it, and I really feel that that's lacking with the contemporary artificial life community. So as I rave in my usual hyperbole, Gerald, I mean, does this make any sense to you?
Yeah, although I'm not sure you can really justifiably have that kind of expectation because, Java, for example, if you want to compare it, is, something that a lot of stakeholders have an interest in for all sorts of survival of their own fittest reasons, for the financial survival. A lot of software is written to run on the virtual machine, and all sorts of companies have bet a whole bunch of their resources on it. So it's a very different thing than artificial life, which is a bit of a currently at least a bit of a fringe phenomenon, which is... But I mean, when
Java started out, it was a relatively... I mean, the very early days of Java, without nurturing, could have put it in the kind of, ML or Ada or these, although Ada, has its own following. But I mean, it could have been one of those languages if it weren't for Sun's kind of immense, not only nurturing with regards to academia, but also nurturing with regards to industry.
Yeah, and also their approach to openness, which started from the very beginning. They were involving people in the community with completely consciously from the beginning. So that has eventually had its effects. It's interesting now, by the way. I was at a get together last week explaining that was involved a couple of presentations of web frameworks, both of them running on the virtual machine, the Java virtual machine. And there was Wicket and Lift. And Wicket is a Java-based framework which has become reasonably popular. And Lift is one written in Scala. I don't know if you've looked at Scala, but that's a very, very interesting language. I'm really kind of tempted, since I learned Java by writing the first versions of what is now Darwin at Home, I'm sort of tempted to press the pause button and rewrite the whole thing in Scala just to learn Scala. Anyway, it's a fascinating language because it came into existence in the academic world and continues to grow there, and it hasn't really been accepted on a large scale in industry at all. But it's built to run on the Java virtual machine. It compiles to byte codes. It represents a very different kind of programming language because it mixes object orientation with functional programming.
What's the spelling on the language specifically, Gerald, for people who are interested in researching more?
It's Scala, Scala. And it's really a fascinating mix of these two languages, and it was able to sort of develop itself separate from industry. And as a result, it has evolved very quickly independently. And now it actually represents, for a lot of people, something that's probably the successor to Java eventually. But at the same time, at this moment, it's far too fringe to even consider for the basis of a project because, as usual, you would have no idea where to find programmers for it. Yeah. For example, and but what is happening is a lot of senior Java people are really seriously exploring it and getting their fingers dirty with it. So it's interesting. There have been countless programming languages invented in the academic world, and they come and go, or they stay having their own meaning in their own little niche. But it's rare that something gets as large as a Java or C++ or something like that.
Well, speaking of finding programmers for it, I'd like to welcome Peter Newman onto the call. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Tom. I finally got here.
It's wonderful to have you on. For folks not familiar, Peter has basically been maintaining the Biota site for as long as I've been the editor. So the fact that you get these podcasts every other week is strictly down to Peter's hard work. So on a personal note, I'd like to thank you, Peter, for all that work.
You're welcome.
So aside from maintaining the Biota site, would you like to give an introduction to the Biota community?
Well, I can't really say I've been terribly active. I've always just been interested. Currently, I'm working with Bruce Damer on a first prototype of the Biota Deep, EvoGrid Deep, sorry. So many terms and I get them mixed up. And they keep changing names. So,
yeah, I'm partially responsible for that. So, in terms of your work, would you like to give an introduction to your background work with Bruce and how you've moved forward to the EvoGrid now and what the EvoGrid currently looks like?
Well, I work with Bruce through DM3D Studios. We first started off just doing 3D visualization stuff for NASA, and then we started working on our own engine to do 3D visualization stuff for NASA, and we kept doing that for a while, and then at some point we sort of said, hey, why are we doing all this visualization stuff? What did we really get into the industry for? And we all sort of said, well, cool stuff like artificial life. And we went, okay, well, let's change directions a bit and go into this, and that's when we started on doing the EvoGrid. After a bit of discussion, it got into being the deep and the broad. So we started work on the deep. Let's see. So I should talk about where the EvoGrid Deep currently is at. At the moment, we're basically feeding semi-random data into a molecular dynamics simulator, and working on being able to change that data and see what comes out. It's basically just a big option space exploration.
And in terms of actually exploring the space, I'm not sure whether you heard Dick Gordon's early analysis about the exploration of the space being the critical component of the EvoGrid in terms of locking in on kind of areas of greatest potential for the formation of life. Is this still part of your thinking?
Oh, definitely. That's definitely right up there. It's the basic idea of the exploration, because there's so much option space that we'd be here forever if we just tried to explore it in some linear fashion, is basically to seed it with a couple of randomly selected points, do basically a fitness analysis on it, apply a number of heuristics to it to generate a range of scores based on things like bond formation, temperature changes, that sort of thing. We haven't really decided exactly what yet. The system's going to be designed to be extendable. And then we will, what's the term I'm after? And then look at the neighbouring options by changing the options by 1% or less than 1%. Create an estimate on what scores they would generate estimated based on the one that we have calculated, and then prioritise the neighbours based upon their scores, and then in that way just keep building a bigger and bigger list of neighbours that are prioritised so that the interesting ones with the higher scores are the ones that get simulated first.
And Gerald, as you listen into this, what are your questions for Peter?
Oh, well, it comes down to probably the main question, which is usually how are you going to set up things so that it doesn't appear that you're putting your own will into the system, which was something that William Buckley was talking about as well during the Biota podcast discussion with him. The big subtle trick that we're all trying to accomplish is to see something emerge and then be able to say, look, I didn't do it. So how are you going to be able to say I didn't do it?
Well, it's one of the slightly interesting points. If you ask Bruce, you'll get one answer, but I have a slightly different answer.
Oh, if you ask Bruce, you'll get 15 answers.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
Great guy, but sure he thinks in a big picture. Basically, it's just that the problem is that we have to build the evaluation functions that we build, and that's why we're looking at building a number of them that we say this was good because it had a lot of temperature variation, and this was good because it had a lot of structure. And in terms that we're selecting for those attributes, it certainly could be argued that we are selecting to see what we want to see. Unfortunately, unless we I can't see any way to do that unless we explore just the entire option space and say, look, hey, something arose here that none of our functions said was likely to happen. It is definitely a problem, and Bruce talks about having it running off dumps so that we're not touching the live simulation, so that we're not changing any variables while the simulation's happening, but I don't really see that being enough.
Did you hear William R. Buckley's idea that basically you need something like Tierra with a much larger space? Ironically, 20 years of Tierra next year, so I've been asked to do various Biota Live celebrations associated with that, but that's an aside. I mean, William R. Buckley's vision was that you take something like Tierra, you seed it with random information, and then you just leave it. And, you kind of go on and do, your own whatever, leave it there simulating away, and after a year you kind of peek back in, and hopefully you'll have some dominant kind of life form within that Tierra simulation. But if you don't, you just put it back down. I mean, I think the nature of grid computing currently is you could almost... I don't know. I mean, when Peter talked about changing things by just a percentage or a small percentage or, a fraction of percentage, this fits in with your current developments associated with Darwin at home as well, Gerald, doesn't it, in terms of just tweaking little things and seeing how things change?
Sure, there's a lot of tweaking in that form, sure, and but that doesn't absolve you of the difficulty.
So if you were to give feedback as a long-term artificial life simulator, Gerald, what would you give to Peter at this stage?
Well, the thing is, the Evo Grid Deep idea at the moment is a really tall order. The idea in vague terms is, let's see if we can see something that we didn't expect to see, and let's just stir something up and see if we see the very, very origins of life. And compared to my approach to simulation, where I'm basically saying, okay, let's assume this and this and this, and we'll go from here and see if we can get any further. I think probably both are legitimate approaches. It's just that if what you were just describing, just set something random going and see if you can detect some patterns after a while. The problem I have with that is that it's like computing for computing's sake, and it's a big waste of literally energy. So if this is happening in a solar powered computer somewhere in the Sahara Desert, then I'm okay with it, because it can just sit there and compute itself silly for a long time, and then we can go observe and see if we can find something. That's fine, because it's all solar energy. But if you're going to run a coal energy station to drive your grid, then I'm tempted to be a little more pragmatic and say, okay, let's make sure we're trying to do something. Unless the scale of things is so small that it doesn't really matter, or unless the computing becomes as inexpensive as William Buckley suggested it will become at some point, that it's completely irrelevant.
But how about if it's spare processing power, like folding at home or these kind of things? Are you comfortable with that being utilized?
It doesn't really help that much, because these, as well as I do, when you're running an interesting program on a computer, the chip gets hotter and it consumes more power, and people should be turning their machines off when they're not doing anything, instead of letting them do sort of something that's not useful. And on the other hand, of course, if it is something like folding home or SETI at home, there is some purpose to it, but it's not like the energy is suddenly free. In fact, you could make a good case that a grid computing solution has the potential of being orders of magnitude more efficient with respect to energy than all these ad hoc manufactured PCs with all their little overkill power supplies and whatever else. Every PC is a bit of a they didn't put a lot of attention into energy efficiency for a PC. So, you have your magical network of zillions of free PCs, but it still costs a lot of energy.
So in terms of the vision of solar-powered artificial life, I mean, you have a beautiful view. You must get some sun in your office, Gerald. Have you thought about putting in solar paneling? I have definitely thought about having a machine doing artificial life activity while being powered by its own, being completely independently powered by solar energy. But I haven't taken any steps on that at the moment. Someday. Certainly. So, Peter, I want to cover a couple of other topics with you, but while we're still talking about your current developments in the Evo Grid, in terms of the problems that you're currently facing, do you have any questions for Gerald or me in terms of, the kind of brain trust of artificial life development that you have on the call currently?
Well, the main issue I'm having at the moment is that I don't know enough about quantum physics, but other than that, let me see, what was I thinking? The current stage is simply throwing random stuff together and waiting for something to happen. The next stage is to attack the plateauing problem, where simulations will evolve so far and then stop. And Bruce wants to see if changing the simulation parameters will allow a new burst of evolution in the creature's simulation, and that's apparently the basis of his PhD, I believe. So what do you guys think of that?
I'll let Gerald go first, and then I'll give you my ideas.
What exactly? Could you be a little more specific?
Well, the idea being that, and I'm pretty sure you've seen that because I know I've seen this in my little play toys. I haven't made anything serious that anyone's ever seen, but I have thrown together little toys of genetic algorithms and so forth. But after a while, they'll reach a plateau. They'll reach an optimum fitness, and and they won't seem to go any further. From this point, every change is a poor change. So they get selected against.
Right.
Basically, a local maxima, I believe.
Isn't this something that you're calling it the second phase? Isn't it? I thought the idea of the EvoGrid Deep was to see the emergence of anything from nothing. It's like the sort of the zero case, zero going to maybe infinitesimal, and now you're talking about plateaus already. I haven't seen the launch yet.
No, we haven't even gotten to the first stage, and we're already thinking about the second stage. I think it's one of those cases of what we'd like to do versus what we can get people interested in having us doing. Ideally, we just like to sit back, throw a bunch of random numbers at it, and see light emerge from nothingness. I believe Bruce is selling the idea that he can find a solution to this problem, that the problem is that simulations only get so far and then stop, and that he can come up with a solution that allows them to continue on further.
A generalized solution, that sounds pretty good. I'm impressed.
Yes.
So if I can throw in you've raised 3 points I'd like to discuss. With regards to Bruce specifically, my understanding is that he is purely talking about the vision of the EvoGrid currently, and the component associated with, as you say, selling the generalized solution. Certainly the feedback that he's received from me and Dick Gordon and a wide variety of his other advisors is that this takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of folk involved. So, that's what I'll say to that point. With regards to your point in terms of limits, this is something that you find with simulations. I'm not sure the nature of the simulations that you're playing with, but a number of simulations have both implicit and explicit limits that are intrinsically built into them, particularly when you're dealing with multi-particle problems and these kind of things. So I know you have access. I know this is all open source and you have access to the source code, so you've probably been through it to try and find any explicit limits. But what you may be missing is actually the implicit limits, which relate to just how the mathematics is constructed, associating with simulating the components. So, that's the feedback I'd give there. With regards to quantum mechanics, this is, one of my degrees is in physics, and the thing that strikes me about quantum mechanics in particular is that we have considerably more a priori intuition with quantum mechanics than we give ourselves credit for. We're kind of indoctrinated with regards to hard, atoms, electrons, particle-related physics and that descriptor. I'm sure you probably have, LED clocks, which you see late at night, and you get this kind of fuzzy effect from LED clocks. Are you familiar with that, Peter?
Vaguely, yeah.
So this is the idea of the photon as basically an oscillating wave function. And as a physics student, probably second-year physics student, I asked a couple of the PhDs whether our eyes were actually receptive to pick up photons, and they agreed, and I've heard this from a wide variety of people, including Australia's Dr. Carl, with regards to us actually being able to pick up photons. So if you think about the way you see a photon, this in fact is in some regard a representation of quantum mechanics in a very real way. It enables you to do Young slits and all these other kind of things, because you get a sense that, somewhere between the particle and the wave there's this kind of jelly thing, which ultimately is what quantum mechanics is all about. So my thinking is that what you're talking about with regards to your own blocks in quantum mechanics relates to certain components in the algorithms that are in the simulations that you're using?
Yeah, we're having to do, the original plan is that the molecular simulation tool that we're using doesn't has static bonds. You set up the bonds initially at the beginning, the atoms are all bonded, and then those bonds do not change over time. And that we figured that something that we would need to do is be able to change those bonds so that chemical reactions can occur.
Certainly.
And I don't know enough about under what conditions atoms will exchange electrons, and whenever I try to read the documentation on it, they go, oh, when you're thinking at it at this level, it doesn't make sense. You've got to go down to the quantum mechanics level, and there it all becomes clear. And I just go, oh, heck.
So just think of it like jelly. I mean, that's exactly the point of the problem, that basically rather than having static bond links, it's in fact probably oscillating bond links where the oscillations actually, recreate or find the joining. And ironically, this is where Gerald comes in, because that's basically what his, Darwin at home creatures do. I mean, they're basically, tensegrities are effectively oscillating bonds. So if you could hybridize, some of Gerald's abstract kind of tensegrity classes, you may actually have what you need. I mean, what you're trying to do is just oscillate the bonds to find optimized for ideal connections. That's basically what you're looking for, isn't it?
Not exactly. Because we've got a cloud of particles flying around, and just the idea is that when certain particles are in certain conditions towards each other, a bond will be created. I mean, that was my thinking of it. And it really comes. I understand the idea that that some connections will be better and some won't, and that you'll create the connection under the ideal conditions and so forth. I just don't know what sort of parameters there are to those conditions that are relevant or not. My initial thought was purely distance, and then I'm thinking is relative velocity a factor and all those sorts of things.
Well, the issue with regards to distance is very interesting, because ultimately what you're trying to do is actually get that connection no matter what length, is right. I mean, within a certain realm. Obviously, you don't want them connecting, across simulated rooms and these kind of things. But I mean, my feeling is that just by allowing for a variable length distance, that when these things came in certain proximity, they were either drawn or repelled, and these things were variables that you put into the simulation, you'd actually get the kind of effects that you want. I mean, certainly the vision of the Evo grid that, Bruce, Dick, Gordon, Gerald and I have discussed in the past relates to the idea of potential as opposed to, actually the way things go in the physical world. Although I think with this varying bond length idea, you'd probably be pretty close to what's actually occurring in the physical world as well. I mean, that's what quantum optimization is about. That's the whole notion of, things fitting into wells and energy levels is just basically them finding the right distance to combine.
I think one of the main difficulties, I keep coming back on this, is the notion of proximity, because I think it's a very expensive calculation when you're not allowed to enjoy the advantages of real quantum mechanics and you have to simulate it, or real mechanics of any kind. Proximity is the big issue. Of course, the game of life solves this by having an implicit connectivity. So things are connected based on their actual addresses in space. So I would think if an Evo grid would also have to have a vast kind of implicit connectivity, just like the game of life does, but then maybe in a different number of dimensions or something. Another point I wanted to come back on here is this idea of plateauing and being concerned about that. On the one hand, I would sort of add a warning to say don't be too worried about plateaus, because I haven't yet seen a horse that can run 250 kilometers an hour. There are plateaus that are inherent, and it's not a cardinal sin to have a plateau of a whole bunch of different kinds. Something that the Evergrid Deep, if you have to take care of maintaining, information about proximity, in other words, if you've got n particles, then you've got a good number of potential connections between them. The amount of information and the amount of storage necessary and the amount of calculation necessary to keep track of the proximity really, gets out of hand very quickly. So again, I'd like to look more at solutions resembling the game of life in a sense, where the connectivity is implicit.
You're talking about quantized space as well, fundamentally too, aren't you, Gerald?
Yeah. In the thing that comes to mind actually when I'm sort of thinking about what might be done to do some simulation of this kind is something that comes from Buckminster Fuller. He Fuller had this. He named this thing, which he called the isotropic vector matrix. It sounds pretty expensive, but what it actually amounts to is closest packing. So if you take 10,000 tennis balls and you toss them into a big box, you'll see that they sort of self-organize into a closest packing pattern where each ball is surrounded by 12 others. And there will be anomalies in this, of course, but in general, the sections of it close packed, just like stacks of oranges at the supermarket. And if you have a matrix that consists of relationships between the centers of the oranges at the supermarket, then you've got this really lovely pattern made of tetrahedrons and octahedrons, and it fills space, of course. And since if you assume that the tennis balls or the oranges all have exactly the same diameter, then of course it's isotropic in the sense that all the distances between the things you're talking about are identical. So it's actually 12 neighbors to every particle, and there are ways to address memory such that all these vast numbers of relationships among adjacent, nodes are implicit. So you don't have to record them. You don't have to worry about them.
And you'd get pretty good carbon chemistry out of that kind of mapping too, wouldn't you, Gerald?
Yeah, you get certain kinds of chemistry. I mean, not necessarily carbon specifically, but certain things can emerge from that. I believe, depending on what you do. I mean, it's still, I haven't been specific yet at all. If you're thinking in terms of the game of life, then why don't we just consider each one of these nodes to be a bit? So it's either 1 or 0, and its next state will be based on the state of its neighbors, something like that. I'm sure that's been done, by the way. I haven't looked it up, but I'm sure it's been done. And you could go further than that. I mean, the thing that actually came to mind that I'm interested in exploring is the idea. Like, just imagine that you've got this isotropic vector matrix where every node is connected to 12 nodes around it, and they're all at equal distance from it, just like close packing. But you allow for some perturbance of this matrix, so it can actually, no longer be crystalline rigid, but you can actually move all the nodes around. But they also have to sort of move in concert. In other words, you make the relationships between nodes sort of like an elastic interval, so that if one of them moves, then it pulls all of its neighbors or pushes them in that direction. They can diverge from the absolutely perfect length that they originally had, but not all that much. The more they diverge, the more force they apply against the difference. And the fun thing about thinking this way is that if you imagine every node to have an address in space, initially the addresses would be completely implicit. So you know exactly where everything is based on what its name is. But if you were to diverge from that, then all you would have to do is record the difference between where you should have been and the place you are now. So you can have sort of like a matrix that is capable of squeezing and it's a bit malleable rather than being so crystalline. And that kind of idea is something that I've been playing around in my mind every once in a while when I'm in the train or something.
Do you have Java classes or something like that show this that you could pass on to Peter?
I haven't got that yet. No, I haven't actually written anything in this regard. I'd like to play around with it sometime, for sure. But, the nice thing about what I'm always thinking as well is in terms of data compression. If the more you can express things concisely in as few bits as possible, the better. So if everything has sort of an implicit location and you only have to record how it diverges from the implicit location, you automatically find yourself saving a lot of storage space and stuff like that, because you only have to talk about perturbances rather than absolute positions.
Does that make sense, Peter?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and interestingly, it's very similar to the one that Bruce had initially. Bruce wanted to basically slap everything down in a flat array and have the 12 links between them on all the cardinal directions and so forth. His idea was that these would be the links would be static, and that there would be multiple particles per nexus, per vertices or pool, as he called them. And I didn't feel that would closely simulate real world physics enough, because he does, and he's constantly repeating the idea that someday in the future, far, far future, that this simulation will allow us to produce real-world objects, very small, swim in a little beaker of fluid. Or if you watch the video that got posted recently, take over parts of England. That was a little disturbing. So
I thought it was wonderful. That was the greatest vision I'd seen with regards to the Evo Grid yet. I was actually thinking of putting it in the Biota feed.
I was a little disturbed because they sort of seemed to escape. It wasn't like they were just like let out in controlled circumstances. They escaped, and it's like, oh dear, because that's what happens. If there's a hole in your algorithm somewhere, the evolving life will find it and exploit it to advantage, and that always happens. And now I'm like, oh dear, should I do this? Someday someone might use my work to create the grey goo. But I'll keep getting paid and keep doing it anyway.
Very much so. That's the nature of pure evil.
We'll put a disclaimer on the side that we accept no warranty implied, or what is it in the GPL? There's no warranty.
That's actually going to be our topic in 2 weeks' time, based on nationalism and artificial life, from the Wired for War book that discusses iRobot and iRobot's use in the military. So I think that's a topical artificial life topic. So if I can change direction just a little bit here, Peter, I mean, one of the projects that I've looked at recently that excited me in a particular way and also excited you was OpenSim. And I think for artificial life simulators, this really is a no-brainer, because it removes ourselves from, the standard traps associated with visualization and having to, create a rich visual environment that then has to be rendered, that then has to be maintained, that then has to be ported out on, Mac, Windows, Linux, et al. And the vision of OpenSim caught me in particular because it carries on this narrative of avatars that Biota originally started with. And I think you had a similar vision with regards to it. Would you like to talk a little bit about OpenSim and your own development associated with it?
Yes. It's actually funny that you mentioned that about the problems of that OpenSim sidesteps a lot of the problems of creating a platform and porting it and so forth, because that's what my job was until relatively recently, was working on the digital space engine, and it was supposed to do a lot. It was intended to do a lot of what the open versions of Second Life have now just stepped up and done. So we kind of missed the boat there, but let's see. OpenSim is if you've used Second Life, it's basically it's a fairly generally trite game where you can walk around and talk to people, and there's not a whole lot to do. It's all user generated. But what OpenSim is someone they basically reverse engineered the product. There's actually no code from the original in OpenSim. It's all been created from scratch, and it's the idea of the server
world, isn't it? I mean, basically what you're doing is creating a server that people with existing Second Life clients can log into and interact with as if they were logging into Second Life, but it is in fact your own creator server environment.
That's right. You can use either the existing Second Life client, one of the many variants, because the Second Life client has been open sourced, and there's a number of groups that take it and apply their own changes to it that they feel are improvements. Generally are. The main advantage being, of course, is that you don't have to. That you get a world for free. You grab this software, you put it on your machine. You don't even have to compile it. It comes pre-compiled, and because it's the platform it runs on, it'll run on everything. And then you have a world. You start off with a space, and it's like 256 meters by 256 meters, and it's just there, and it basically costs you, an afternoon worth of setting it up. And then all the code there, it's all like being open source, and it has allowances for plugins and so forth. So you can very quickly throw together your own module and load it in and have it do pretty much anything.
And the thing that interested me, and this goes back to an early Biota podcast with a fellow called Douglas Davis, is the ability, I mean, my own view with regards to, having an overlap environment through OpenSim was that the player, or the person, the human interacting with the simulated environment would appear as a noble ape and have the same interactions with the simulated noble apes as if it was a noble ape. The simulated noble apes see it as another noble ape and interrogate it and do various things to the player as if they were a noble ape, and the player can respond to them and interact with the environment in a very kind of personal level. I mean, the added interest is if you have multiple humans in a simulated environment with simulated entities, how does this actually work as well? I think there are a number of layers to this interface that really caught me. And in terms of debugging, I mean, this is the thing that I really get out of long-term simulation of Noble Ape and tweaking Noble Ape to particular environments is that I get a huge amount of feedback in terms of the bugs in the simulated interaction, which refine my own thoughts. I mean, Peter, as you looked at OpenSim, it immediately gelled with you that there was artificial life potential in this environment too, didn't it?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, in fact, that was part of why I started looking at it in the first place. But I was, I've got, a number of ideas, and I thought, hey, I'd already thought, can I do these on Second Life, on the real, official Second Life servers? But then there's a free server, and it's like, hey, I can put this on at home and do it myself.
But the other thing with regards to the Second Life servers is that they've been relatively hostile associated with creating artificial life. I mean, we have Jeffrey Ventrella, who really is, almost founding father of certain aspects of the community. Certainly Aquarius Artificial Life, I mean, he is, the founding father with regards to aqueous environments and artificial life. And I think he has a long legacy in terms of developing both, walkers and swimmers and, cellular automata, and he's exploring gliders currently. And he went over to Linden Labs. I mean, this is taking, a brilliant mind from the artificial life community and putting it into Linden Labs. And from that interaction, they weren't able to actually create an artificial life environment for a wide variety of factors. And certainly I've worked with two other teams who have worked external to Linden Labs but tried to bring artificial life into Linden Labs. And my sense of the problem is that Linden Labs has never really kind of grokked, to use the Damerian term, what artificial life can actually do in these kind of environments. Now, the beauty, as you describe OpenSim, is it's a relatively small environment for you to play with. Gerald, I mean, as we talk about this, do you imagine people logging into a kind of Darwin at home environment through a Second Life client? Does that make sense to you?
I think it's an excellent approach to playing around with some artificial life, simply because one of my main focuses is that things be very accessible, and people already have Second Life clients, and if you can work within that environment, you've already got something that's very accessible and can reach a lot of people. On the other hand, I can understand Linden Labs' concerns because, as you well know, any sort of real artificial life, if it's not just totally pretend, is compute intensive, and they can't afford to have that on their servers because their servers are serving fairly large numbers of people at the same time. So an OpenSim approach is really the only option, because then you have a free hand to do whatever you want aside from what the server's already doing. You should be able to sort of slip some of your own code in there and not worry so much about having too many users at the same time initially and stuff like that. I think it's an excellent approach. I would love to eventually realize at least a rendering of evolved Darwin at home creatures in Second Life, and OpenSim seems to be a good approach for that. One of the people I'm having at the Gratham meeting is a real Second Life sort of star. She does machinima in Second Life. She's recorded a number of films, so she's fairly familiar with she's actually very familiar with the whole community and OpenSim and even tweaking up the client, because of course it's open source, and for the purposes of making the film, she had to sort of be at the absolute bleeding edge of the open source client. So they put in these sort of bleeding edge plugins to have lips move according to audio, just to make the movie something that doesn't look old too quickly, because this sort of stuff is not yet in the Second Life. They have to sort of be ahead of the curve. which is really interesting. So they're really on the cutting edge of what you can do with the client and with the server.
Certainly. And returning to the original topic of this podcast, I mean, my great concern with regards to setting up a Noble Ape, OpenSim server, or even better, a Biota Eve OpenSim server, is that it would completely eliminate my day job in terms of the amount of work that would require in terms of bug fixes and things like that. It would almost not be a hobby as soon as we got a certain number of users. And this is the thing that really concerns me, that these things, will generate so much feedback in such a short period of time that it is in fact could in fact be completely overwhelming for us as artificial life developers. Returning to the idea of finding value in artificial life, if we had, for example, a Darwin at Home OpenSim server that grew buildings for the link back to your work with the architecture firm, do you think this is something, Gerald, that they could utilize, and would this make artificial life more real to them in terms of your own work being, of some degree of financial benefit to them? Does that make sense to you?
Well, on the one hand, I can completely echo what you were saying, that it would be potentially a vast amount of work for a hobbyist, and I've been able to keep things in my project under control because I've been very extremely humble on the graphics end and trying to to keep the model as absolutely trivial as possible, so that it can compute really quickly. And if you have to surrender yourself to a bunch of potentially solid limitations of an OpenSim server, you spend a lot of time working through those limitations. On the other hand, of course, the ability to just have a ready-made client where people can be familiar with established ways of navigating that people are familiar with. It's a way to say, look what I've got, and then everybody just takes a tour of it rather than having to introduce them to all sorts of new things at the same time. So I think it could be very useful, at least as a spring jumping board to get into it more, because it's just so accessible, and you can probably create some impressive stuff very quickly.
And Peter is the only one on the call who's currently being paid to create artificial life, or at least artificial chemistry. In terms of things like OpenSim and these kind of tools, how do you see people actually getting jobs in artificial life into the future?
Well, that's an interesting one, because, I don't mean to head off into too much of a direction, but a lot of people got into Second Life thinking they could get a job there, that doing things in Second Life would either singing, playing music, building things for people would become an income and become a job, and it's worked out for a very, very, very small portion of those people. There are one or two successes, some I know personally, who make a reasonable living doing things in Second Life, but there's a lot of people who haven't. And I think that artificial life might go in a similar way.
It has already. I mean, let's be clear here. You are probably the only person I could name off the top of my head, aside from Bruce Damer, and he doesn't really make a living from doing stuff with artificial life. I mean, I think the community, there are a small number of people that do things related to artificial life that make a living through it, but the hobbyist community actually represents probably the greatest number of people who could, people like Jeffrey Ventrella, for example, make a living if the terms were there. But really the purpose of this recording this evening was just to start to talk about how this idea of value emerges from something like artificial life. So what are your thoughts on that, Peter?
I would like to say that, yes, this is going to change the world. That's, my personal feeling, that at some point something will happen and it will be obvious to everyone, but I cannot see a way there, and I don't see even OpenSim and similar things, I don't see that immediately being, yes, this is the missing link, if that sort of answers the question.
Yes, I tried to offer a blueprint in the start of the show with regards to my own thinking about how we can move towards some kind of greater sense of value, and the first part is really doing a surveying of all the uses of artificial life and working out how the artificial life community can strengthen these uses and assist folk who are who are doing these things, which, then filters back into the community.
But isn't it true that there's a value in the effort in general? I mean, we're on the one hand you're focusing on a number of very challenging concepts with respect to how life emerged. So it's an approach to computer science that's trying to be inspired by natural evolution and what happened in the real world, and it's just it's a direction more than it's going to be a value in the sense of look at the results, they're valuable. It's valuable as a sort of an intellectual direction, and who knows, after it could take a century of playing around or 50 years or something, and then we may have an entirely different form of computing, something based on quantum mechanics or something like there have already been some efforts in quantum computers, so maybe it's at that point that it turns out to be something useful. There are things in history that, despite our being accustomed to the high speed 21st century, things like complex numbers were invented and sussed out completely long before they were useful, because complex numbers became useful when electronics came around. So that was hundreds of years later. It may be that working in this direction is going to teach us a lot, and then eventually we will, for a completely different reason, come up with a tool that makes it all possible to realize some things. So don't hold your breath, but it might take a half century.
Certainly.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that it reminds me a lot of the space race, that a lot of people say, well, what did that ever do for us? We got to the moon, we put some people on the moon, we raised a little flag and flew on home, and then what? And yet there's a lot of technological advances that are taken for granted that were as a result of this thing that didn't achieve anything, and yet all the spin-offs have carried on into everyday life.
Yeah, and there's also this valuable concept, I thought, of Buckminster Fuller's called precession. What he talks about, it's really a fascinating idea. If you read some, I think, Tom, you would be interested in what he says about this. The idea is that it's analogous to spinning a bicycle wheel. You push it in one direction and it responds by going in 90 degrees to that direction when you push on the axis. And this sort of, in a metaphorical way, when you put in a lot of effort in a particular direction and you really focus on it and you really flesh it out, you may discover something that's completely orthogonal to it, completely 90 degrees, that you would have never encountered if you hadn't made this trip anyway. So it's we're looking for emergence here. Well, we might just find emergence in our own ideas.
Certainly. And finishing up the show this evening, Peter, how do people find your work? How do people get in contact with you?
My current work is on evogrid.org. My past work's on digitalspace.com. You can put www in front if you really like.
The thing with evogrid.org is it's now a wiki as well, isn't it?
That's right. We just got that running in the last week or two. It's still missing a bit of content, but that's something I'm going to be doing this week, is spending some time fleshing out the missing gaps in that.
It's also, I think the community can actively contribute to that as well. I've certainly been on the site and moved Gerald from the UK to the Netherlands only in the past couple of days, and done various other things, put in links and, more background information, particularly with regards to the audio. I think there's a lot of stuff that the community can actively contribute to. The interesting thing for me, and this is really the visions of the Evo Grid, is the idea that Bruce, in his kind of role as a kind of wandering, technology renaissance man, has actually, it's the people that have communicated with Bruce as much as Bruce is himself that's really constructed the modern Evo Grid. And certainly when I listen, and I'm not sure if you've heard the private audio as well, Peter, but when I listen to a lot of the private audio conversations that Bruce has had through his travels, this gives me a sense that there's so much more in terms of the descriptive Evo Grid that something like the wiki could actually be used to kind of distill, and particularly because text search is still the primary way that people find information on the internet. It'd be fascinating to start getting people coming to the Evo Grid purely through text search alone.
Indeed, I keep nudging Bruce to try to put some more stuff into text and make it more readily available, but he is always on the next idea. And
well, I think that's really the nature of the narrative with Bruce. I mean, this is another reason I did the visions, is to get other voices in and actually see, the amount of refining work that Bruce does in terms of his presentations. I mean, he will meet with, between 5 and 2 dozen people in between each of the presentations, and every one of them perturbs him slightly. Anyway, look, Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the call this evening, and certainly, don't be a stranger. Please participate in all means necessary, and it's wonderful not having you just maintaining the Biota site, but also as an active part of the Biota community.
Well, now that I know it's actually not at a crazy American time, I can actually take part.
Well, it's at a crazy American time and a crazy European time as well. And speaking of that, Gerald, it's always a pleasure to have you on the call, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to occur in 2 weeks' time with regards to the next Grey Thumb Netherlands. Do you think you'll be able to audio record or video record some of it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm going to try, and I'm not sure exactly what to record. I mean, audio might be good enough. We'll see. But I definitely want to record something and put it online.
I mean, if you could just record people giving introductions, preferably in English, and just giving a sense, I think all your stuff to date has been recorded in English, and just that kind of audio is always useful in terms of just getting a sense of the kind of broader group of people that actually attend these Grey Thumb meetings.
Yeah, well, this is, the first time we're sort of sitting around a table rather than sitting in chairs facing one direction at a presentation. So I think it's going to be an environment that will lend itself more to that kind of thing. Very
good, very good. And in 2 Fridays' time, we are going to be discussing artificial life and nationalism, a rather darker topic in some regard, but also a great opportunity for me to play the 4th of July Biota Live theme, which I have squirreled away on my hard disk from the last 4th of July. Gerald, Peter, pleasure talking with you both, and thanks to the listening audience for listening in once again.
Nice talking, Tom.